Welcome back and thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Hopefully I'm gonna pick up more and more interest as we go. I am back on my buggy today, and today's project is axles, trusses, suspension mounts. Now, as you know, I've already made quite a few changes to this chassis, like the cage and the upper links, things like that. There's a lot more to do. Here's where I'm going to get started. These are the mounts that came with the chassis. Now I've re-drilled them so they'll take a 5/8 instead of a half. I wanted the bigger bolt, especially since we're going with such a large spread. I'm using weld washers on these, and then I've just got my bushing assemblies mocked up in there so that everything will hold together. Now I'm going to take these out of the chassis. Let's see here. As such. And I can weld all of this on the bench. Decided to go from half to 5/8 on the shock mounting bolts because that's what I wanted and that's not what was supplied. All right, the rear shock mounts. Now these are 3/16 steel, so they should be strong enough. Of course, I go overboard. I ran a weld washer, increased my bore to 5/8, and I also welded the bushings in, which I think you should do, but that's just me. Now, the strength of the weld on these is on the inside, not on the outside where I ground them off. I just thought that looked more finished. They had a ridge and a line and they just didn't look right to me. So I would just ground that off and made them look a little more finished. The only thing I do know for sure I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run a bridge from one side to the other, which will increase the strength, but I don't know if I'm gonna add more metal to these. So before I tack these in, I will make that decision. Beads aren't quite as pretty going vertical up for me, but they're strong. I think those will hold. A little bit of gusseting and the front side gusset. These things ought to be darn near impossible to break now. Just getting stuff lined up here on the front of the chassis so I can start setting up my upper shock mounts. The cross support kit for the chassis, and you know, I can weld this together and then weld it to these tubes. I'm thinking a piece of 120 watt DOM will be a little bit stronger, and I really don't care about the cute little bends in it, so I think that's the way I'm gonna go. I used the original kit they sent me, which was made out of real thin metal, as a jig, and then I cut the tube and spot welded these bushings in, and I'm going to start there and see where it ends up. Cross support for the upper shock mounts, I did have to put this kick in it on both sides so that it angled it the direction I needed it for the front shocks. Now when I cut this, I didn't cut it all the way in half. I cut it and then I separated it on this side to get the bend to go that way, and then I did a multi-pass weld. Once I had these lined up, spotted in, and double-checked them, I went ahead and fully welded them on a vertical up, trying to keep these as strong as I can, and I weld both sides inside and out, and then flip the chassis and weld the underside as well. That way I have a lot of area for that weight to get displaced. As you go, you got to make sure that your stuff all still fits. This metal likes to warp as it gets hot. Now I can put my gusset plates up, burn those in. Let her cool down a little bit and do this. It's a little warm right now. Now that the top's done, I'll flip the chassis over and do some work underneath, finish up some welds there, and I'll see if there's anywhere I can put gussets. But until I get the additional structure, which will have a bar coming down and then coming back up for the support, because this is too long a run without additional support, I probably can't do anything else at this point on the shock mounts. Put the original cross support together exactly like the kit was, except with a piece of tube. Then I discovered I had to chop it and put a little crick in it because these aren't the exact same angle. So I took a new piece of tube and just made a straight bar, because the reality is a straight bar is going to be stronger than anything with a bend in it. This is that additional gusset I've added for the shock mounts. It gives it a lot more structure. I got the chassis close to a point where I need to start figuring out the geometry and where my axles are going to go. To start, I'm going to set this front axle just in front of it, but more importantly, I got this truss I ordered from Artec for the front. Now, this truss is not going to fit this axle, so why buy it? Well, I did a bunch of measurements on this axle, and all of the manufactured type trusses, they give you a measurement on long side, short side for the axle itself. Now, in 78 and 79, Ford had an F250 and an F350 with about a 6-inch tube showing on the short side. This particular axle is like 6 3/4 on that short side. So this truss has probably the best chance of fitting of any of the trusses I found. Now this is a right-hand drop and the Fords were a left-hand drop, but theoretically I should be able to flip this 180 degrees and then switch the front and back plates, and it might get pretty close. So I'm going to get this unpackaged and see where we end up. Now, if we look at this truss, it looks pretty good. The only downside is this side is closer to the knuckle than that side. So if I trim this down a little bit and I trim this out a little bit, I'll be able to center it. Other than that, I really like how this truss sits. I will have plenty of room up here to really dial in where I want my links to mount. Plus, it gives me some areas where I can weld additional structure for my full hydraulic steering ram. And smooth her out. That should work just about as planned. All right, that worked out just about perfect. I've got 3 3/4 tube showing here. I've got 3 3/4 tuck showing on the other side. I could trim this down a little bit more if need be, but I really don't need to. It's sitting just fine where it's at. Now it's time to do a whole bunch of welding on this truss. Of course, the nicest beads you do are ones you'll never see, so just thought I'd throw that out there. Tacking internally on this outer one, and now I will do many minutes of welding there. Little side note here, got this top part welded. If you question whether or not you're penetrating good, just make sure it turns funny colors on the back side. Close up for you. Don't forget to weld the keyways either. Back side's fully welded and the front side's fully welded, so we are ready to roll here. Just to answer the question, yes, I did get some warpage out of this top plate, but it's right at the thinnest spot. So I could have probably just jacked it up and bent it, but I added some heat to it, used a piece of angle iron, and then jacked a mechanical jack up to push it down to warp it back. Now, if you tack weld this all to an axle ahead of time before you finish weld it, you won't have any of this problem. But I really wanted to make sure I got good welds and got this fit right before I burned it onto this particular housing. Let's see if I can do this in somewhat short order fashion. I have set my truss where I think I want it. I have leveled my knuckles with the truss so they are in the same plane as my truss. Now before I do anything else, I want to kind of see what kind of caster I have. Now I've got a camber caster head, and as long as I keep this level, I can turn it 20 degrees in, level the bubble, turn it 20 degrees out, re-level the bubble, and I can see what kind of caster angle I have. Now I've done that off camera because it takes a little time to do that setup on this. I am right at 1.5 degrees caster. Caster is a non-tire wearing angle which is done for handling capabilities at speed. And the highest speed this thing's probably ever going to do is about 30 miles an hour between a trailer and a trailhead. So I'm not real concerned about high speed handling. Now I can add a couple 3 degrees if I want to by adjusting my links, but right now I want to make sure my knuckle is where I am reasonably happy with it in relationship to the truss. A couple other things I need to do before I burn this truss in and make it a permanent fixture is make sure my upper links will clear the drive shaft and the pinion yoke. This is a manufactured built high pinion 60, and that pinion does set up very high with the face of this housing on a level plane. What that does is at full stuff, the drive shaft angle has a down slope to the transfer case. At full droop, it has an up slope. The key to that is you never have a really bad angle on your drive shaft. So that gives you more travel and less chance of breaking something. So at this point, what I'm going to do, I've got my truss centered, I've got it leveled, I've got it where I think I want it. I am not going to burn it in yet. I am going to tack weld about 4 spots on it so it stays in place. Then I'm going to start moving this under the chassis, and we'll start doing some serious geometry work. Before I go any further, I am going to wrap those struts with some saran wrap so they don't get bunged up. But I think I'm actually pretty close. The axle will come up another inch or so in relationship to the chassis. I'm not sure yet how long I'm going to make it. Adding some more structure to where the winch make a triangle. Decided to do this while I was killing some time waiting for the rear truss to show up, and now that the rear truss is here, we'll get started on that. Triangulated winch mount. I think this is all I'll need to trim on the front side of this truss, and then this is all I need to trim on the top part. Hopefully that's it. This one's a little different than the front truss. The front and back plates need different areas trimmed out of them, so I'm doing them one face at a time. One side down, one side to go. don't think I'll have to trim this little piece here off like I did on the other side, but I know I have to take that one off. Okay, I think we're good there. A little bit more. I actually want my truss back a little further. That way my pinion points the right direction. And then my truss is in the right place. So I decided where I wanted the truss, which is right here. Now, I want this bridge, that's what this is called. But when your bridge is on, you need it behind this plate so that you can still do repairs on your differential. So what I'm looking at is where I need to cut this to run it under. This would work great on a factory non-steer axle, but not on this. All right, a little trimming. We're pretty close. I made a couple witness marks on my knuckles where the truss goes. That way I know exactly where to set the bridge. Now this bridge, there's a little gap there, which is okay. I'm going to grind the back of that off a little bit so that there's enough of a gap on the back side to weld too. This is going to be interesting. This is going to be a cool little truss, provided it all works. A little more modification here. I think I got it trimmed up enough to fit correctly, but a big caution when you're doing stuff like this that you're going to have to weld. Tighten the bolts down good so that everything is really locked in where it truly goes. All right, I think. While this welding is going on, I just wanted to give you a side note. The front, the rear truss, the shock mounts on the front and the rear, I have now used 22 pounds of welding wire so far. I think you get a much better complete welded truss if you weld it all on the bench. This time I'm clamping it down so that when it cools, it should be pretty close to straight. I've got the chassis setting on some jack stands. I have taken my engine hoist and I have moved the axles front and back. Now, the first thing I do at this point is determine my wheelbase. So I want to try to hit 112 is my goal. I can fluctuate that back or forward a little bit. I don't really want to go any longer than 112. I really like that wheelbase. If I have to go a little bit shorter, I'm okay with that too. It'll perform basically the way I want it to. Now, once I get the axles kind of square to each other, then I'm going to square the chassis to the axles and shift the chassis rear or forward and try to equal my control arms. All right, now I've kicked both sides out here to 112. Now I'm going to a fixed point again on the chassis and to a fixed point on the axle. to make sure I am square. Now this is where you will have to just move it a little left or right. And verify that with your center notch. Doesn't take much. Well, I think on many. Okay, the front end is triangulated square. It is set right on the money with my notch. From the fixed point on the lower link mount to the center of the ball joint, or the spherical ball, I should say, is the same on both sides. So in a triangle, I have equal sides. Now I got to verify the back is the same. Okay, where it sits right now, I am squared axle to axle. Chassis to axles are squared. I am just under 113. So right now with it squared, I think what I need to do is lift the chassis up to its complete compressed height, get that set, and then I can kind of fine tune it back down to 112. But it took about an hour to get this squared. So now everything you do until you get your links and mounts tacked in, you need to do in really small steps and measure everything a dozen times. Now I've got to weld my link mounts, the weld washers that I'm going to use on the top of these trusses, and get ready to measure for links. Weld washers complete. I'm also welding the lower shock mount kits together. I'm not sure exactly which ones I'm going to be using. I ordered a couple different ones from Artec. I want to make sure I can place them in the right area and have the right geometry. So we'll see which ones I end up using. I really haven't raised this up to its full squatted area, but my links will actually fit right there. Now I've got to assemble a whole bunch of big hind joints. Because I need to get these set where I want them. Now right here it is at full compression and everything will clear. Drive shafts and everything. So little tweaking, but this is pretty close to where the axles are going to sit. But I've got the rear set, I think, where I want. I'm at 112-inch wheelbase right now, and this will put my fronts right about there, which should fit perfect once I get the bracket combo that sets it behind the rear axle. I'm at a good stopping point right now to stop what I'm doing on the suspension, because I need to install a couple of things on this chassis to make sure I've got clearances in the right place. One of those is the fuel cell, got to get that in. A couple other things while I was setting this in there I figured out I need are some gussets and more structure for the, I call them the long tubes coming off your center section of the main part of the chassis to help stabilize the nose and the tail tubes coming out of the chassis. Give it some more rigidity, give it some more strength. So I'm going to take care of those things and then jump back into the suspension side. I requested 13 gallons, and so they played with their CAD a little bit, and they got it to like 13.4, but it mounts here. It does sit with a sump that's a little bit below, but it's in a protected area, so I don't think you really have to worry about it hitting on anything. It's also baffled, so it will take a gas mat. It's got a cutout section back here so you can run a rack back. I've seen them add mounting points back there, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I don't want anything else creating stress on my fuel cell. Now, I'm putting these little rubber bushings in before I do my tank setup. Now, I can mount these underneath and bring this tank up from below, but I think I'd rather have a little less storage room up here. I'm also going to put a little bit of an air gap up there for heat transfer plate and things like that. But I like having bushings and stuff so that it keeps noise down, and it may save your tank a crack or something of that sort at some point. After I get the bushings in and I get this centered up, I'm also setting this piece of angle iron right there just as a spacer. That'll get this about 3/16 of an inch away from that crossbar. Expansion, flex, things like that, I don't want anything rubbing where it's at. This will still give me plenty of room for the radiator. I'll be able to mount a deflection fan or a deflection shield for the fan. And my tubes here are not yet cut into the frame pipes, which are also my cooling passages. So kind of a big kid's Tetris is kind of how this goes. Now I'm going to go ahead and spot weld these in, and then I'm not going to burn them in until I get pretty much everything else ready, and then I'm going to burn a whole bunch of stuff in and weld everything all at once I know clearances fit and finish. Added this gusset to both sides, which goes down to the base frame, and again I will be having more tube work coming up in here, but I thought that was a place that really called for a gusset, and when I flip the frame over and do some more finish welding, I'll weld the bottom sides of those, but top sides are in at this point. So the rear gussets weren't quite at 90 degrees angle, and they were angled up a little bit, so it took me a little bit of time to fine-tune the tube so that it fit nice and tight into the rear section. And then once I got them fit, then it was time to weld the rear gussets in. And again, I'll weld the top sides of these gussets right now, and then when I have everything apart, I'll turn it upside down and I'll weld the bottom sides later. Again, a gusset here just seems like it really should have one anyway, so a gusset it is. Well, that was fun, building these upper shock mounts on the front of this, and I let it sit for a week, and I had a shock lined up in it with this axle, and did those modifications on the gussets for the chassis, and set the gas tank in, made some other stuff that I needed to do while I was thinking about this. And after setting a couple of weeks, I decided I do not like the geometry on these front shock mount kits, so off they come, and more chassis modifications. The only thing I like is the crossbar, and I had to modify that, so we are removing them. I decided to leave these because I've already got the crossbar. Now down here, I'm going to run a flat plate along here and structure it out. I'm still using the top plate and the crossbar, but now I've got this complete solid plate under here. Now I can weld tabs and twist them any direction I want before I burn them in. Okay, got my plates tacked on both sides. It's tough making those identical. A little bit longer tab here, shorter one here. Kicks it in a little more perpendicular angle. My shock lines up just really nice now. I actually like this much better than the kit brackets this came with. Now, once I flip this over, I'll weld a gusset in here or here, and it'll be ultra strong. I think that's gonna do it for this video. As you can see, there's a lot to do on building your own car. Every nut, bolt, screw, pipe, tube, axle, driveline, it doesn't matter. Any part of building a car, especially if it wasn't manufactured at some point, will require you to think about how it's going to fit, how it's going to work, where it's going to go, what you're going to do with it. So there's a lot of work, not just on the vehicle, but thinking about what you're going to do to the vehicle. So this is going to have many videos in this series. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. Please stay tuned for it. Like, share, and subscribe. And see you next time. Sometimes we end up doing a trail repair before we ever hit the trail. This is on the side of I-70 doing a turbo replacement on a Dodge Cummins. Back on the road. There's a familiar YouTuber. Got a pretty good sized group today, a pretty well-versed group from more than stock to full-blown buggies. A little break at the top and looking around at the views. This is a little playground area with a bunch of spider trails going up from the base area. Nice. I got my advertisers out here. Here's where that rear steer thing would come in really handy.
Oh, now they're involved you.
Walk right up.
A little bit more now, straighten it out, and just go straight and don't stop. Just go.
Momentum.
A little more this way. A little more. There you go.
No problem.
Good job.
So